Welcome, deep divers. Let's kick off today with a really eye-opening story. It dramatically shows just how interconnected everything is.
Oh, sounds intriguing.
Yeah, picture this. Remote subarctic islands about a century back. Humans introduce Arctic foxes. Seems simple, right? Maybe for the fur trade.
Okay, foxes on islands. What happened?
Well, the result was massive. These islands, they used to be these vibrant green grasslands, but they quickly transformed, turned into stark, barren tundra.
Wow, grasslands to tundra just because of foxes. That sounds drastic.
It was a real puzzle. But researchers eventually figured it out. The foxes, see, they preyed heavily on the local seabirds,
Oh, birds.
reduced their populations by nearly 100-fold. And fewer seabirds meant way less bird guano, their waste.
Right, guano, it's incredibly rich in nutrients, like a natural fertilizer.
Precisely. And that guano was the main nutrient source for the island's plants. So take away the guano.
And the nutrient-hungry grasses couldn't survive. Makes sense. They need a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus.
Yep. And the slower growing plants, the forbs and shrubs, typical of tundra, they could cope better with fewer nutrients, and they took over.
Did they test that idea?
They did. Scientists actually added fertilizer to some barren plots on those Fox Islands. And guess what? Within just 3 years, boom, grassland again.
Incredible. A direct link. Nutrient levels drove the whole landscape change.
It's a perfect, if unfortunate, example of what we call an ecosystem. It's all the organisms living in a certain area, interacting with each other and with the abiotic factors.
Abiotic, meaning the non-living stuff, like
Yeah,
sunlight, water, temperature, soil minerals.
exactly. And ecosystems, they can be huge, think lakes, forests, even oceans.
Yeah.
Or they can be tiny, like the world under a single log,
The boundaries can be pretty fuzzy sometimes too, right?
for sure. Which leads some ecologists to view the entire biosphere, all life on Earth and its environments, as one giant global ecosystem.
It really drives home that idea of connection. Pull one thread, like adding foxes, and the whole system responds.
So that's our mission today. We're going to unpack this concept. We'll explore the two fundamental things happening in every ecosystem: energy flow and chemical cycling.
Okay, energy and chemicals, the big two.
We'll look at how basic physics governs these, how they determine an ecosystem's productivity, and importantly, how human activities are messing with them.
And maybe even how we can start to fix some of the damage.
Exactly. We'll touch on restoration ecology too. It's a crucial deep dive.
All right, let's get into it. Where do we start?
Well, you can almost think of an ecosystem like a huge biological machine, or maybe like a giant cell.
Okay, I follow like how cell biologists track energy and materials inside a cell.
Precisely. Ecosystem ecologists do the same thing, just on a much larger scale. They follow the energy, map where the chemicals go.
And it all comes down to some fundamental laws of the universe, doesn't it? Like thermodynamics.
Absolutely. First up, the first law of thermodynamics, the conservation of energy. You can't create it or destroy it, only change its form.
Right, like plants taking solar energy, light energy, and converting it into chemical energy in sugars through photosynthesis. The total energy amount stays the same, it just changes shape.
But then, and this is crucial for ecosystems, you've got the second law of thermodynamics.
Ah, the entropy law. Things tend towards disorder, and energy conversions aren't perfect.
Exactly. Every time energy is transferred or transformed, some of it is lost as heat. It increases the entropy, the disorder of the universe. Conversions are inefficient.
And that heat loss is key. It means energy doesn't really cycle within the ecosystem in the long run. It flows through it.
Right. It comes in mostly as sunlight gets passed along and eventually exits as heat. It doesn't loop back around.
Which is why that continuous input of energy, usually from the sun, is absolutely vital. Without it, the whole system would just run down.
So energy flows. But what about matter, the elements, the chemicals?
That's different. Here, the law of conservation of mass applies. Matter can't be created or destroyed either.
So unlike energy, chemical elements get recycled continuously.
Yeah, think about a carbon atom. It might be in CO2, get taken up by grass, eaten by a rabbit, the rabbit poops.
A decomposer breaks down the poop, releases the carbon back as CO2, and the cycle starts again.
Exactly. That atom sticks around. It just changes partners, moving through different parts of the ecosystem.
And we should remember, ecosystems aren't isolated bubbles. They're open systems.
Meaning stuff comes in and stuff goes out, energy comes in, heat goes out, mass comes in, waste goes out.
Right. Nutrients can blow in as dust or arrive in rainwater. Nitrogen can be pulled from the air by bacteria.
And elements can be lost too. Gases escape, water carries nutrients away. The balance between these inputs and outputs is critical.
It determines if the ecosystem is, say, gaining or losing nitrogen over time, which directly affects how productive it can be.
Okay, so energy flows, matter cycles. How does this organize life within the ecosystem?
That leads us to trophic levels. It's basically a way of grouping species based on their feeding relationships. Who eats whom?
Right, the base level, that's the producers.
Yep, the autotrophs, or primary producers. Mostly photosynthetic organisms. Plants on land, algae, and cyanobacteria in water, they build the energy base.
Capturing that sunlight, turning it into food?
Although, don't forget the chemosynthetic guys, like bacteria in deep-sea vents using chemical energy. Pretty amazing exceptions.
True. Okay, so after the producers.
Come the heterotrophs,
Yeah.
the consumers. They rely on the producers. So primary consumers are the herbivores eating the plants.
Like rabbits eating grass.
Then secondary consumers are carnivores that eat the herbivores,
Foxes eating rabbits.
and tertiary consumers eat other carnivores.
Like an owl eating the fox, maybe. Or a bigger predator.
Could be. And then there's a super important group we can't forget,
Hmm?
the detritivores, or decomposers.
It's a cleanup crew. Feeding on detritus, dead stuff, fallen leaves, waste products.
Exactly. And while some are animals, the real heavy lifters are prokaryotes, bacteria and fungi. They break down complex organic matter.
They secrete enzymes, dissolve the material, and absorb the nutrients. It's external digestion, really.
And their role is non-negotiable. By breaking down that dead organic stuff, they release the chemical elements back into inorganic forms.
Making them available again for the primary producers. It completes the cycle for matter.
Seriously, if decomposition stopped, life as we know it would just grind to a halt. Nutrients would be locked up.
It really is the ultimate recycling system. Essential.
Okay, so we have the basic rules, the players. Let's talk about the ecosystem's budget, its primary production.
Right. How much energy are those producers actually capturing?
Exactly. It's the amount of light energy or chemical energy for the chemotrophs converted into chemical energy stored in organic compounds per unit time. This sets the energy spending limit for the entire ecosystem.
And globally, it's a staggering amount, even if the efficiency isn't super high.
Totally. Earth gets hit with about 1,022 joules of solar radiation daily. Only about 1% of the visible light that actually reaches photosynthetic organisms gets converted.
Just 1%. Seems low.
It does, but it still adds up to about 150 billion metric tons of organic material produced globally each year. That's huge.
Okay, so how do ecologists measure this productivity? I've heard of GPT and NPP.
Right. Gross primary production, GPP, is the total amount of energy captured by producers. But plants need energy to live too, right? They respire.
Of course. They burn some of that sugar they just made for their own cellular processes.
So if you subtract the energy the producers use for their own respiration from the GPP, you get net primary production, NPP.
Ah, NPP is GPP ray. That's the energy that's actually stored as new biomass.
Exactly. Think of it like your paycheck GPP versus your take-home pay after deductions. NPP. NPP is the energy available to the next level of the consumers.
So an ecosystem might have a lot of plants, a big biomass, but if they aren't growing fast or are respiring a lot, the NPP might not be that high.
Precisely. A mature forest has huge biomass, but its NTP might be lower than a rapidly growing grassland where stuff is eaten and regrows quickly.
Okay, got it. And then there's NEP.
Net ecosystem production, NEP. This takes it a step further. It's GPP minus the restoration of all organisms in the ecosystem, producers, consumers, and decomposers.
So NEP equals GPP-RT. What does that tell us?
NEP tells us whether the entire ecosystem is gaining or losing carbon over time. If NEP is positive, the ecosystem is storing carbon. It's a carbon sink. If it's negative, it's releasing more CO2 than it's taking up a carbon source.
That seems incredibly important for understanding things like climate change, measuring CO2 flux.
Absolutely crucial. So what actually limits primary production? What controls that budget in aquatic systems like oceans and lakes?
You might think sunlight first, especially deeper down.
Light is definitely a factor in the photic zone, the upper layer where light penetrates, but surprisingly, globally, light is often not the main limiting factor in the water.
Really? What is then?
Nutrients. More often than not, it's the availability of nutrients, especially nitrogen and phosphorus.
Ah, like the Qantas story.
Exactly. Think about the open ocean like the Sargasso Sea. Super clear water, looks beautiful, but it's often limited by the micronutrient iron. Probably because it's far from land. Not much iron-rich dust blows in.
Wow, iron, a micronutrient having such a big effect.
But then contrast that with coastal upwelling zones, places where deep, cold, nutrient-rich water gets pulled to the surface.
Those were often incredibly productive, right? Lots of phytoplankton supporting big fisheries.
Totally. It's all about nutrient supply. We saw this in freshwater too. Pollution with phosphorus from sewage and fertilizers caused massive algal blooms, cyanobacteria blooms, killing fish. That led to reforms like phosphate-free detergents because phosphorus was the limiter there.
Okay, so nutrients are key in water. What about on land?
On land, the big drivers at large scales are temperature and moisture. Climate, basically.
Makes sense. Tropical rainforests, warm, wet, they're the champs of productivity.
Right. And deserts or Arctic tundra, either too dry or too cold, they have the lowest NPP. Generally, more water means more production, up to a point.
And soil nutrients must play a role too.
Definitely. At a more local level, soil nutrients are often the limiting factor. Globally, nitrogen is a very common limiter for plant growth. In older, more weathered soils, especially in the tropics, phosphorus often becomes the primary limiting nutrient.
And plants have evolved ways to cope with that, right?
Oh yeah, amazing adaptations. Things like mutualisms, partnerships,
Yeah.
nitrogen-fixing bacteria living in root nodules, converting atmospheric N2 gas into usable ammonia.
And mycorrhizal fungi. Those fungal networks that associate with plant roots and are super efficient at scavenging phosphorus from the soil in exchange for sugars from the plant.
Plus, physical things like extensive root hairs to increase surface area, and even releasing enzymes to unlock nutrients bound up in organic matter. Plants are resourceful.
But this balance seems delicate. What about climate change? How's that affecting NPP?
It's already having major impacts. We saw some initial increases in NPP in places like the Amazon, maybe due to less cloud cover initially. But since around 2000, things like hotter droughts have started to reverse that.
Out of drawer.
Yeah, droughts combined with higher temperatures, like in the American Southwest. They fuel more intense wildfires, lead to huge insect outbreaks like bark beetles.
Which kill trees and reduce photosynthesis, so lower NPP.
Exactly. And sometimes the impact is so severe it can flip an entire ecosystem from being a net carbon sink to a net carbon source.
Whoa, releasing more carbon than it absorbs.
Yes. Think about the Arctic tundra warming up. The permafrost thaws, microbes become more active, decomposing ancient organic matter and releasing huge amounts of CO2 and methane. More release than the plants can take up through photosynthesis in the short growing season.
That's a dangerous feedback loop for the climate.
It is. Or consider the massive mountain pine beetle outbreak in British Columbia a while back. It killed so many trees over such a vast area that the entire forest region switched from being a carbon sink to a major carbon source for years.
It really shows how interconnected climate, pests, and the ecosystem's carbon balance are.
Okay, so producers set the budget. Now, how efficiently does that energy get passed on? Let's talk about the energy handoff.
To the consumers, this is secondary production, right? The energy converted into the consumer's own new biomass growth and reproduction.
Correct. And one surprising thing is that in many ecosystems, herbivores actually eat only a small fraction of the plant production. Most of it goes uneaten.
And ends up as detritus, feeding the decomposers.
Exactly. Now let's look at an individual animal's production efficiency. How much of the energy it eats actually becomes, well, more animal?
Right, not just burned for daily living.
The textbook uses a great example, a caterpillar. Let's say it eats 200 joules worth of plant material.
Okay.
A huge chunk, maybe 100 joules, passes right through his feces, undigested. Another big portion, say 67 joules, is used for cellular respiration, just keeping the caterpillar alive, moving, breathing, lost as heat.
So 200 in, 100 out as waste, 67 burned for energy. That leaves.
Only 33 joules out of the original 200 actually go into growth, into new caterpillar biomass. That's its secondary production.
So its production efficiency is 33 divided by 200. That's only 16.5%. Seems low. Oh, wait, the example numbers in the outline were different. 33J growth, 200J intake, 100J feces, 33-100, 33% efficiency of assimilated energy. Still, a lot is lost.
Right, using the energy assimilated. Yeah. Intake minus feces is the standard way, so 33% efficiency. But compare that to birds and mammals. We're endotherms, warm-blooded.
We spend a ton of energy just maintaining our body temperature.
Exactly, so our production efficiencies are way lower, maybe only 1 to 3%. Most energy goes to heat.
Whereas cold-blooded animals, ectotherms, like fish,
They do better, maybe around 10% efficiency. And insects, microorganisms, they can be even more efficient, sometimes 40% or more.
Okay, so that's individual efficiency, but what about the transfer between whole levels, from producers to primary consumers, primary to secondary, etc.?
That's trophic efficiency.
Yeah.
And it's always lower than production efficiency.
Why is that?
because it has to account for everything, not just the energy lost to respiration by the organisms that were eaten, but also all the energy in the biomass at the lower level that wasn't eaten, plus the energy lost in feces of the consumers. It accounts for the total production at one level compared to the total production at the next.
Okay. So it includes uneaten stuff and waste too. What does that number usually look like?
This is where we get the famous 10% rule. It's a general guideline, an average.
Only 10%.
Yeah. On average, only about 10% of the energy available at one trophic level actually gets incorporated into biomass at the next level. 90% is lost along the way, mostly as heat from respiration.
Wow, that's incredibly inefficient. 90% loss at every step.
It has huge consequences. Think about it. If producers capture 1,000 joules, primary consumers get maybe 100 J. Secondary consumers get 10 J, tertiary consumers, only 1 J.
So that top predator only gets 1,000th of the original energy captured by the plants.
Roughly, yes. And this explains why food chains are usually pretty short, maybe 4 or 5 levels max. There's just not enough energy left to support viable populations at higher levels.
And why top predators are often rare and more vulnerable. Less energy available means smaller population.
Exactly. You can visualize this with ecological pyramids. An energy pyramid showing energy available at each level always has a wide base, producers, and gets drastically narrower at each step up. It has to, because of the second law.
Right, reflecting that 90% loss. What about biomass?
A biomass pyramid showing the total dry weight of organisms at each level usually looks similar: wide base, narrow top. Think of a grassland. Lots of grass biomass, fewer grasshoppers, even fewer mice that eat them, and very few hawks at the top.
Usually. Implies there are exceptions.
There are. And this is fascinating. Some aquatic ecosystems can have an inverted biomass pyramid.
Inverted, more consumer biomass than producer biomass. How does that even work?
It happens, for instance, in parts of the English Channel.
Hmm.
You have phytoplankton as the producers. They're tiny, single-celled algae. Their total biomass at any given moment might be quite small.
Okay.
But they reproduce incredibly fast. They can double their population in days or even hours. So this small standing biomass can support a much larger biomass of zooplankton, the tiny animals that eat them.
Because the phytoplankton are turning over so quickly, their production rate is super high, even if their snapshot biomass is low.
Exactly. The high turnover rate of the producers sustains a larger consumer base. It's about production rate, not just standing stock.
That makes sense. It's dynamic.
Now, if we think about us, humans, these energy transfer concepts have big implications. Eating meat, which puts us as secondary or tertiary consumers.
Is energetically quite inefficient compared to eating plants directly.
Right. The amount of grain needed to produce a kilogram of beef could feed many more people if they ate the grain directly.
So from an energy efficiency standpoint, shifting diets towards more plant-based foods could allow us to feed more people using less agricultural land. It connects ecosystem principles directly to global food security.
It really does. Okay, so energy flows through, gets lost, but matter.
Matter cycles, it has to be recycled because we have finite amounts of essential elements on Earth.
And who are the stars of recycling?
Our friends, the decomposers again. Fungi and bacteria, breaking down dead organic matter and releasing those vital nutrients back into inorganic forms that plants can use.
How fast this decomposition happens really varies, though. Depends on the environment.
Right. Temperature, moisture, nutrient availability, they all affect how fast decomposers work.
So in a warm, wet, tropical rainforest,
Decomposition is super fast. Leaf litter disappears in months, maybe a year or two. Most nutrients aren't in the soil. They're locked up in the living trees and other plants. Nutrient cycling is rapid.
compared to, say, a temperate forest like we have here.
It's slower. Decomposition might take several years, so you get a thicker layer of leaf litter and organic matter in the soil. The soil actually holds a significant chunk of the ecosystem's nutrients.
And in really cold or waterlogged places.
Very slow. Think of peatlands. They're cold, wet, often acidic. Decomposition is so slow that dead plant matter builds up over centuries, forming peat. They store enormous amounts of carbon because production outpaces decomposition. Same in anaerobic mud at the bottom of lakes or oceans.
So decomposition rates really control how quickly nutrients become available again.
Absolutely. And these pathways, the movement of elements between living organisms and the non-living environment, are what we call biogeochemical cycles.
Bio for life, geo for geology, rocks, soil, chemical for the elements themselves. It involves everything.
And some cycles are global, others more local.
How so?
The elements that have a gaseous phase, think carbon, CO2, oxygen, O2, sulfur, SO2, nitrogen, N2, can travel long distances in the atmosphere. So their cycles are inherently global.
What happens in Brazil with deforestation can affect atmospheric CO2 levels everywhere.
Exactly. But heavier elements that don't form common gases, like phosphorus, potassium, calcium, they tend to cycle more locally, mainly within the soil and water of a specific area, though water can transport them over broader regions in aquatic systems.
Okay, let's quickly touch on a few key cycles, maybe water, carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus.
Sure. The water cycle is fundamental, obviously. Driven by solar energy causing evaporation, mostly from oceans, transpiration from plants, condensation into clouds, and precipitation. Oceans hold most of the water, land surfaces and groundwater hold the rest, essential for everything.
The carbon cycle. Carbon's the backbone of organic molecules. Photosynthesis pulls CO2 from the air, respiration puts it back.
Major reservoirs are fossil fuels, soils, ocean waters, dissolved CO2 and carbonates, living biomass, and the atmosphere. The largest reservoir is actually sedimentary rocks like limestone, but that carbon is locked away for very long geological timescales.
And humans.
We're significantly altering it by burning fossil fuels and clearing forests, releasing vast amounts of stored carbon into the atmosphere as CO2, driving climate change.
Okay, nitrogen cycle. Crucial for proteins, DNA. Often limits plant growth.
Right. The atmosphere is about 80% nitrogen gas, N2, but most organisms can't use it directly. It needs to be fixed.
Nitrogen fixation, converting N2 into usable forms like ammonia or nitrate, mostly done by specialized bacteria, some associated with plants like legumes. Lightning also fixes some nitrogen.
And humans are now major players here too through industrial fertilizer production. We now fix more nitrogen artificially than all natural processes combined.
That has huge consequences fertilizing crops, but also causing nutrient pollution in waterways. Other bacteria do nitrification, ammonium to nitrate, and denitrification, nitrate back to N2 gas, returning it to the atmosphere. It's complex.
Very. And finally, the phosphorus cycle, needed for DNA, ATP, cell membranes, bones.
Its main inorganic form is phosphate, PO43. Unlike the others, there's no major gaseous form.
Exactly. So it cycles more locally. The largest reservoirs are sedimentary rocks of marine origin, also soil and oceans. Weathering of rocks is the main way it slowly becomes available.
Its slow release from rocks often makes it a limiting nutrient, especially in older landscapes.
Right. These cycles are intricate, and understanding them is key. There's a fantastic long-term study that really highlights this. The Hubbard Brook Experimental Forest in New Hampshire.
Ah, yes, a classic ecological study. What do they find?
They monitored the water and nutrient flow in several small forested watersheds for decades. They found that intact, undisturbed forests are incredibly good at holding on to nutrients. Very little was lost in stream water draining the area.
Okay, a healthy forest acts like a sponge for nutrients.
Precisely. But then they did an experiment. They clear-cut one entire watershed, left the logs, and used herbicides to prevent regrowth for a few years.
What happened to the water and nutrients then?
The results were dramatic. Water runoff increased by 30–40% because there were no trees to absorb and transpire water.
Makes sense.
But the nutrient loss was staggering. The concentration of nitrate, a key nitrogen nutrient in the stream draining the deforested watershed, shot up 60 times higher than in the control watersheds.
60 times. That's enormous. Unsafe levels even.
Yes, reached levels considered unsafe for drinking water. Other nutrients like calcium and potassium also wash out in large amounts.
So the takeaway is,
Plants, the living vegetation, play an absolutely critical role in retaining nutrients within an ecosystem. Removing them causes those nutrients to leach out rapidly.
which not only depletes the soil for future growth, but also pollutes downstream ecosystems, causing things like algal blooms. It shows how tightly linked the land and water are.
Exactly. A powerful demonstration of nutrient cycling principles.
Given how much humans have altered landscapes and cycles, it's clear we need ways to repair the damage. That brings us to restoration ecology.
Yeah, ecosystems can recover naturally from disturbances like fires or storms, but severe human impacts like mining pollution, chronic agriculture depleting soil, oil spills can degrade them so badly that recovery might take centuries, if it happens at all.
So restoration ecologists try to speed things up.
Exactly. Their goal is to initiate or accelerate the recovery of degraded ecosystems. It's based on the idea that hopefully much of the damage is reversible, though we also know ecosystems aren't infinitely resilient.
What do? Where do they start?
They often have to tackle the physical structure first. If a stream was straightened into a ditch, they might reconstruct its natural meanders. If it's an old mine site, they might regrade the slopes, maybe bring back topsoil.
So fix the physical container, then work on the biology.
Often, yes.
Yep.
The long-term goal is biological restoration. Two main strategies here are bioremediation and biological augmentation.
Okay, break those down. Bioremediation.
Using organisms, often microbes or plants, to detoxify polluted environments, like using certain plants that can absorb and accumulate heavy metals like lead or cadmium from contaminated soil. You plant them, let them grow, then harvest them to remove the metals.
Wow. Using plants as vacuum cleaners for toxins.
In a way, yes. Or using specific bacteria. There's one, Shionella oneidensis, that can convert soluble uranium, which spreads easily in groundwater, into insoluble forms that precipitate out and stay put. They've used it to drastically reduce uranium contamination at some sites.
That's clever. Okay, and biological augmentation.
That's about using organisms to add essential materials or functions back to a degraded ecosystem.
Like adding nutrients.
Exactly. If a site is very nutrient poor, like after mining, restorationists might plant nitrogen-fixing species like lupines to help build up soil nitrogen levels naturally.
Using those nitrogen-fixing bacteria we talked about earlier.
Yep. Or they might inoculate the soil with mycorrhizal fungi to help newly planted trees establish and access scarce nutrients like phosphorus. It's about giving the ecosystem the building blocks or helpers it needs to recover.
And it's not just about plants and microbes, right? Animals too.
Absolutely. Restoration often involves helping animal populations return, maybe by creating habitat corridors, reintroducing species, or even just putting up perches for birds, which then help disperse seeds. It's about restoring the whole functional ecosystem.
There are some amazing large-scale projects too, right? Like restoring rivers or creating sanctuaries.
Yes, things like the Kissimmee River restoration in Florida, turning a straitened canal back into a meandering river floodplain, or the Maungatatari project in New Zealand, creating a huge fenced sanctuary to exclude invasive mammals and protect native birds. It's hopeful work.
It really is. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today, from Arctic foxes changing landscapes,
To the fundamental laws of energy flow and matter cycling.
the limits on primary production, that surprisingly leaky energy transfer between trophic levels.
The vital importance of biogeochemical cycles, and how we can potentially restore damaged ecosystems.
So, wrapping this all up, what's the big takeaway for you, our listener?
Well, maybe think about this. We've seen how climate change is already starting to flip some ecosystems, like the Arctic tundra, from being carbon sinks to carbon sources.
And we saw how just one introduced species, the Arctic fox, could cascade through the food web and fundamentally alter the entire landscape by changing nutrient cycles.
So considering those examples, what might be the long-term consequences, maybe even evolutionary consequences, for species living in places like the tundra as they continue to warm rapidly? How might those intricate food webs and nutrient cycles shift further?
And maybe, what responsibility do we all have, just as people living our lives, making choices as consumers, as citizens, to understand these powerful ecological forces and maybe influence them for the better?
Some deep thoughts to ponder. Thanks for diving in with us today.